Hello and welcome to another Chess Guess video. So today, can you find Bobby Fischer's best moves? Today, Fischer has the black pieces, and this game was from 1970. Fischer is playing against Dragoljub. See if I pronounce that right. Dragoljub Minik. All right, anyway, let's move on here. Try and guess Fischer's moves. I'll flip the board around so you can play as Fischer. And his opponent begins with e4. Now, Fischer was known for saying e4 was best by test, that he felt that was one of the best moves to play with the white pieces to get the advantage. So what does Fischer play against it? c5. If you're a Fischer fan, you may know that Fischer often played the Sicilian defense, pushing the c pawn to c5. He often played that against e4, where you cover this square in case white wants to push this pawn in the future. All right, knight to f3 to allow this pawn to be pushed in the future. And now Fischer continues with d6 here, which prevents this pawn from coming forward and harassing a knight if a knight lands here on f6. Now we have d4, the open Sicilian, where what do you think Fischer would do? If you're familiar with the Sicilian defense, then you'll know what should be played here most of the time, probably all the time. All right, so capture, recapture. Let me know if you want more or less commentary in the future. As I mentioned in previous videos, I did see a video where there was no commentary. So if you want me to shut up, just let me know. Fischer attacks the pawn, and so his opponent defends that. Now what should Fischer play, or what do you think he would play? a6. This is the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian. It keeps pieces out of b5. You can possibly push that b pawn in the future for an attack on the queen side. Let's see what Fischer does next. After his opponent plays this move, bishop to g5 attacking the knight. Now what do you think Fischer does? He pushes the e-pawn. So if you found that, good job. You're probably more familiar with the Sicilian defense. The reason this is done is now the queen is guarding the knight. So if bishop captures, the queen can just capture without doubling the pawns up. f4 is played, gaining space on the king side. And how does Fischer respond? Bishop to e7, breaking that pin of the bishop on this knight to the queen. Queen develops, and white is ready to castle kingside. So Fischer continues with queen to c7, lining up here where the king is likely to castle. And his opponent does castle there. So now what is Fischer going to do? Knight is developed, and the game continues with another pawn pushing forward because Fischer's opponent is anticipating that maybe Fischer will castle kingside, and if that happens, there's a pawn storm already well underway here. Pawn pushes forward. Fischer tries to get a pawn storm going of his own, threatening to attack this knight in the future. The bishop can develop here to b7 and line up on the queen and the rook. So we have a capture, knight captures, and the pawn pushes forward attacking this knight. So where should Fischer go with that knight? He just retreats, and his opponent continues with a3, trying to slow these pawns down. Fischer brings the rook over to the b file because now this pawn can push forward attacking knight and pawn here, trying to open things up on his opponent's king. So the game continues with h4. Fischer's opponent continues the pawn storm of his own, gaining space on the king side. What does Fischer do? He just ignores that and continues with his plan over here. Capture, rook captures. So now there are two open lines against his opponent's king. So this is looking dangerous for his opponent already. And apparently this is a mistake. The first mistake of the game. According to the computer, this is a mistake. There is a possibility of capturing here. If pawn captures, then the knight captures, forking the queen and this pawn, trying to break things open against Fischer. But let's see how Fischer responds. Wow, Fischer castles right into the king side, possibly into this line of fire here as the pawns are marching up. But, Fischer was such a great player, I'm sure he calculated what could happen. Now, what should he have done? Well, maybe I'll go over that in some analysis, but afterwards. But to keep the game going, let's continue to guess here. Fischer's opponent offers a knight sacrifice. Fischer declines that, improving the position of his own knight. And now, capture of the bishop here. So if you stick around, I'll do a quick game review and actually dig into these possible moves, why that knight wasn't captured. But for now, let's just continue. So hopefully you guessed that Fischer just recaptures. Now his opponent continues the pawn press here, storming forward. Bishop lines up on the queen and rook there. And so Fischer's opponent just presses forward. And now Fischer grabs a pawn in the center, attacking the queen and the rook. So, capturing is best. But now we have a recapture. His opponent captures here. What does Fischer do? Well, he just activates his other rook, lining it up on the king. And so the game continues with rook moving up to the second rank. Now it's Fischer's turn. How does he continue here? Rook slides over, threatening a possible check over here. Now Fischer, let's see, if we look at the material, we have 5 pawns versus 5, but in the future, Fischer could just pick this pawn off. So he may be looking to exchange material, bringing that rook up to check the king. And if the king runs, he could pick off the rook over here. So the king does not allow that. And the game continues with Fischer pressing forward, relieving the rook of guard duty on that knight. And d5 is usually one of your goals in the Sicilian defense, is to try and push your pawn, your d pawn up to d5. And generally when that happens, black's position is freed up a little bit. They have more space to maneuver, because sometimes the Sicilian defense, the black side can be cramped. All right, an attack. Fischer just snaps up that pawn. Now we have an attack on the rook. Fischer just lines up on the king. And a counterattack over here. So, threat of a mate in 1 here against Fischer. So what does he do against that? He counterattacks, checking his opponent's king. The king runs towards the center, the best move. And now a discovered check on the king, just harassing that opponent's king. So the king runs back over here, trying to take cover. Fischer sacrifices the rook. Well, it's protected by the knight, so the computer says this is a brilliant move. So maybe you found that move. You have to remember there's a threat of a checkmate over here. So capture. The checkmate threat is no longer in the running here. So an attack forking the king and the rook here. King is running. Fischer pins the other rook to the king. And the final moves here. Bishop developing. We have rook to a1 check. King is running for its life. And now Fischer just snaps up this rook. So as far as material, Fischer is ahead by 2 pawns at this point, and he has a good attack against his opponent's king. So king to e1 and knight to e4, and this is where the game ended. So I will do the quick review, if you want to stick around and look at that. It looks like Fischer played with 91% accuracy, his opponent 84.5%, and the computer thinks that Fischer played at a 2450 level here versus 2250 by his opponent. But Fischer did have a brilliant move and 4 great moves. They had a few misses and 1 mistake by his opponent and 1 inaccuracy by Fischer. All right, so let's start this review. It'll just blast through the moves real quick. If it works here. Start the review. Why is it not reviewing? Oh, we have to go back to the beginning. Excuse me. All right. Review. And there. Okay. Fischer's opponent begins with e4, and then it's just going to blast through these moves. We had the Sicilian defense. And what is next here? And, let me know if you, in these chess guess videos, do you even want to see this extra game review here? So that was a mistake. Apparently the best move would have been centralizing the queen here. Getting it out of the line of fire of this bishop developing and aiming down through here at the rook. All right. What would the... we'll just keep it moving here. I don't want to make this video too long. So castling, a missed opportunity. Best for Fischer would have been what? To immediately target the knight and this pawn at the same time. But Fischer did not do that. And Fischer was known for looking at different moves, and if he knew a move was good but more solid compared to one that looks good but it was risky, he would take the more solid, safer move if he knew that they, both gave him an advantage. All right, so let's go back here. We have this missed opportunity. Apparently, the knight should have just captured here. And then after pawn captures, the bishop could capture with check, and it would give up 2 pawns for that knight. So here, Fischer apparently, if the computer's correct, missed an opportunity. He should have done what here? What is best? Dropping back with the bishop. So what would happen if we would just capture that knight? Probably should take a look at that. So dropping back is best. Let's look at this capture. If the capture occurs, what next? Let me put on the analysis, uncover that. Okay. Here, the best thing for white is to just capture with the pawn. Oh, maybe that was wrong. Hold on. E takes f5 is a mistake. Oh, knight to d5. Okay. What am I thinking? It allows that. The fork of the rook and the queen. All right. Back to what actually happened in the game. Okay. So let me pull up this review. Look at the next moves. Okay, bishop is lined up on the queen, the pawn, the rook. The game continues here. And now, all right, this great move. And then a brilliant move. So we can go to the end and we'll see how the game could have continued. But at this point, Fischer is ahead. Let's see, by 2 extra pawns. The game ends here. Best continuation would be what? To knock out that knight. So capture. Queen to b4 check. Checking this way is best. And then what? King up to f2. But now you have queen takes e4. And more material is traded off. And as you trade down more material, those pawns will be more powerful in the end game. And harder to stop if you have less material to stop them with. So the best thing here is, oh wow, queen to f3. And then Fischer would just trade off queens. And next we have the passed pawn starts running up the board. And this Fischer could capture this pawn at any time as well. All right, well, feel free to leave comments, like and subscribe to support the channel. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.